What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
I'm good, Brian. Unfortunately, today I'm going to remind everybody about something that's going to happen to every one of us, and that's death. So hold on tight. Hold
Welcome
on
to the
tight to your
show.
seat. Yeah, welcome to the show. Anyway, I find I'm currently reading two books, and one of them's called The Historicity of Jesus. It's by Richard Carrier, and then another one is called Immortality: The Quest to Live Forever and How It Drives Civilization. And that one's by Stephen Cave. But it's fascinating, and I haven't finished not either one of them completely yet, but I recommend people get them. The Historicity of Jesus is really like an academic book, heavily referenced, really, really good if you have any interest in the history of Christianity and how the gospel and the stories were put together. The book really goes through it in a rational way and uses probability statistics, or what's known as Bayesian logic, to come to his conclusions.
Okay.
Anyway, the other book is written more for lay people, but both of them are really good. But I guess my first question is, Brian, when do you remember a time when you were going to die? When's the first time you thought about death? Do you have a death in the family, or when do you ask about it? When do you think about your mortality?
That's a good question. Honestly, I think if I had to just assume, the first time would be sitting in Catholic church, knowing that if I didn't obey, not
Uh-huh.
good things would happen to me.
Right. And if you didn't obey, guess what? That not good thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to go to hell, or you're going to die. You won't be born again. You won't come back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My first time where I thought about death was actually out of this pet iguana, and it died. And I was like, what the hell happened?
Uh-huh.
I was really young, and then I got my first concept
That's
of death.
That's a good point. One time I had a gerbil, Keoni, and I was super,
Yeah.
super young. I had a bunch of gerbils, and I dropped it. This was like horrific. I loved this gerbil. I dropped
Yeah.
it in, those balls that they kind of run around in? You can like let them
Yeah.
run around the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
I had it in the ball, and I dropped it, and its
Yeah.
spinal cord severed, and it just had
Oh.
just a completely dead bottom. And I remember that being horrific. And then the next day they had to put it down, however they do that. So I guess honestly that might have been my first little forte
Yeah.
there, definitely with pets.
Yeah. That's where mine came from. And then as we get older, this story of our, mortality gets reshaped. But what do we do about this mortality thing? Well, think about like exercise. Think about like the stuff we talk about, like health.
Mm-hmm.
Like improving your health. Is that a possible way to stop death, or at least slow it down? Like, are we motivated by death by being healthier? And I
Yeah.
would say, yeah,
Right.
we kind of are, right?
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. And it's fascinating that there are studies out there that if you took two groups of people and just reminded them of their mortality in some way, they're very much more likely to believe stories that kind of influence their grasp of immortality, so to speak. So think about religion, right? So religion's a big one throughout the ages. Religion, all these dying savior gods, they die, they're being sacrificed so that you can live on forever in some way,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And so you see that throughout the ages. But this guy in this book, Stephen Cave, talks about four basic immortality stories. And one of them, I think me and you are kind of in this healthcare field, but one of them is what he calls the elixir of life. It's like grasping for the fountain of youth,
Mm-hmm.
using science and stem cells, nanotechnology, genetic engineering to manipulate your genes so that you can live forever,
Right. Yeah.
or taking a Chinese herbal so that you can extend your life somehow, or just eating better so that you can extend your life. But when we actually look through history, and Chinese medicine is really notorious for this, because there's a period in ancient China where this was the main thing, like find the elixirs to help people live forever. So and there's all these stories that this magical formula was out there that got lost through the ages that allowed people to live forever, and so on and so on. But honestly, these are just immortality stories. And when we look back through history, has anybody defeated death? No.
Yeah.
Nobody has. I mean, that's the blunt truth of it. Nobody has.
Right.
So it's likely that me and you are going to die.
Seems
that way, right?
Yeah.
And so with that being said, so I'm listening to this guy, Stephen Cave, who wrote this book, Immortality, and he's like, all right, well, let's just figure out when your day of death is probably going to be. And he has this real simple formula that you basically, take the year that you're born, right?
Okay.
Add 80 years to it.
Okay.
And if you're a male, subtract 2 years. And if you're female, add 2 years. And if you smoke, subtract 10 years. Just a basic formula.
Uh-huh.
And statistically speaking, that's probably the year you're going to die, statistically speaking. So mine is 1970. I don't smoke, add 80 years to that, subtract 2 because I'm male. I'm probably going to die around 2048.
Yeah, 2061 is a little too early, Keoni. Wasn't planning on that.
Yeah, well, that's probably when you're going to no longer exist.
Perfect.
Okay. So anyway, there's he talks about 4 basic immortality stories, right? One's the elixir of life, found in youth, which you just talked about. The other one is hits on religion a little bit, resurrection stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you accept death, but if you believe the right way or do the right thing, you're going to rise again, like Jesus, and a lot of these stories in monotheistic religions. Like,
now, does that include like reincarnation and stuff like that, or no?
Yeah, to some extent it does. To some extent it does. But I think another immortality story a basic immortality story says, well, that will fit more into that, and that's probably the next one.
Okay.
All right. But anyway, so what do we do with this one? Basically, people think, oh, well, can I beat death? You've heard about people freezing themselves, at death, in the hopes that some scientist is gonna be able to thaw them out and at some future date and allow them to live, and therefore they defeated death. Or you have an omnipotent God, who through his or her sacrifice or whatever you believe in, helps you live forever. And I just want to go through some of these stories that you see throughout history. And so for like thousands of years before Christianity, you had this a female god called Inanna, who was a descendant and ascendant, dying and rising god, and basically through her trials and tribulations, she helped humanity, defeat all their problems, death being included. There's another god named Tammuz, who this is all before Christianity. So I want to find, rise and savior gods before them, so that people just see the story of how we humans have had this, this notion.
Commonality.
Yeah, well, this notion of that we're going to die, and what other stories we can tell ourselves about death so that we can, not have this existential crisis about it, right?
Right.
So another one is the Adonis, the Greek story of Adonis. He's kind of like a death and resurrection, because he, basically based on that story, he spends, half the year down in Hades and the other half a year on the earth, and therefore you have the seasons. I think that's the way the story goes, but he dies and rises.
Okay.
There's the Egyptian god Osiris, same thing. Very similar stories to the monotheistic stories of
Mm-hmm.
religion. And then there's also some like old ancient Jewish cults, like the cult of Baal and Anat, that kind of go through this whole thing. But I think, you know, that as soon as humans realized that they were going to die, or had the awareness of that way back in prehistory, you know, now we start having these stories of how we're going to defeat death. And it motivated a lot of people, and I think almost every individual, because most of us do not want to die, right? And then and most of us don't really like thinking about it too much. And when we do think about it, we're more likely, based on science, to believe stories that are not really rational. If you think about it, right? Like you said, like it's me and you, there's a, you know, I'd have to say 100% chance we're going to die.
I'm still holding out for the medical hope. I got the 99.9.
Right, but at those dates that we said, and there's and I'm much more likely to die way before you. You know? And I'm actually reminded of it every day when I look in the mirror now, because I'm starting to see gray hair here, you know, wrinkle there. You know, it's like that long, slow march towards dust, so to speak. Anyway, so that's the resurrection stories we kind of tell ourselves, and then there's this whole concept of the soul, right? And this is what you're hitting on with, like, maybe reincarnation in a sense, right? So it's fascinating to me that a majority of people on the planet, not just here in the U.S., believe in a soul. And the whole concept is when you die, there's some ethereal thing, energy that leaves your body that is you, you know, and you go on and live forever based in this soul.
Yeah.
You know, and once again, we have no proof of this, although there was a scientist out there who claimed that he knows the weight of a soul. You know, he's weighing people before and after death, and he got something like I don't know what it was, like 20 grams the soul weighs or something.
Yeah, I've heard that.
and floats off. And then modern, you know, there are some people out there going, oh, well, you know, another way to preserve yourself with science is to, you know, upload yourself into a computer. There's a movie out recently of that, and therefore you can, you know, live on forever. You know, but it's interesting, you know, my patients who are dealing with family members who may have Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, you know, what you really see is you know, the brain, what you really see is when you have end stages with this, the brain, you know, a lot of these people are no longer the people that family members remember, because the brain is being degraded in such a way that their personality can change and yada yada yada. You know, so we see that. And then the other thing about the other interesting thing is, you look at in Buddhism, right? Basically, you die and your soul floats off somewhere, and then you get reincarnated into some other being. You've heard that story of the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, how they found him and stuff. So anyway, the story goes, like, when the previous Dalai Lama dies, right, within a 2-year period, it's up to the religious experts in that religion, the Buddhist monks, to go out and find the next Dalai Lama.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, you know, so
I'm sending out all the signals that I'm at. I'm writing them letters.
Yeah. So anyway, the story goes, or the legend goes, that the current Dalai Lama was found somewhere in Tibet, and they showed this child who fit the age, you know, was born around the same time that the Dalai Lama died, and they showed him all the belongings of the old Dalai Lama, and the child supposedly picked out, you know, the stuff that said, oh, this is mine, you know, and seemed to get all the answers right, and therefore this Dalai Lama that we have today was found. Anyway, that's the whole concept of, you know, you live, you die, your soul goes out, and you get reincarnated.
Yeah. Keoni, can I ask you, so in In naturopathic medicine, it's obviously based around the chi idea. So
Yeah,
how do
yeah.
you
We call it the vis, medicatrix naturae. Yes.
so how do you fit that in with like this kind of construct and knowing that you're being a very scientific physician, but you have this aspect of which you view, and then correct me when I'm wrong, but the energy that flows through a human.
Hmm. Well, I view it, first of all, I don't view it as fact. I view it more allegorically, right? So it's more a nice framework for how to describe things. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
so for example, I would describe that as, call it the, what would we call that? For naturopathic physicians, we call it the vis medicatrix naturae, basically Latin for nature has healing power. It's the energy that flows through us. Like you said, in traditional Chinese medicine, that's like chi, the
Mm-hmm.
chi energy that flows through us. From a Western point of view, Judeo-Christian point of view, maybe you call it the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit that's in us, or soul, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I view all that stuff as, just allegorically, like it's just ways of explaining things that we really don't have a great understanding of.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's fact,
Right.
right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but I would say this: what we do know is energy, from the first law of thermodynamics, energy can be neither created or destroyed, right? So
Nor. Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So when you die, that energy that you have is put out into the universe,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
that's how I wrap my head around that.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's how I wrap my head around death also, in a way, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when I die, um, the one thing I know that's going to live on pretty much indefinitely until the end of this universe, are at least all the atoms that I have in my body, are going to be reincorporated into something else, whatever that may be.
Jeez. Thinking about
Right.
that is a lot scarier than thinking about going to heaven or hell, honestly.
Well, it's true, right? I mean,
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
me and you have atoms in us that were in the dinosaurs,
Mm-hmm.
that were in other life forms before. Me and you have atoms in us from stars that have long since died. So that, in that sense, we live on. But is there a consciousness? Is there a soul and all
Mm-hmm.
that? I think these are just, stories we tell ourselves based on, this whole fear of death,
Right. Yeah.
you know? And then the fourth story is basically is basically legacy. And this is what the Stoics talked about, right? Creating legacy, or creating legacy in such a way that you have a positive influence that lives long after you. And you can create legacy in a number of ways, right? So you can create legacy by living a really good life that people can maybe learn from. You can create legacy doing what Genghis Khan did, right? By having
Raping and
thousands of
pillaging.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Mongolia right now, like, what do they say? Like, half the
That's
country
crazy. Yeah.
has genetics related to Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
So you create legacy that way. You can create legacy. How else can you do? A lot of famous people will create legacy. Well, I really want a statue of myself that will live long on after my. So famous people. You see a lot of dictators really love this, making big, huge statues of themselves that they think are gonna
Yeah.
live on forever.
Uh-huh. Until the U.S. government comes and topples them down.
Right, that's the end. Yes, that was the true death of people. Yeah. If there is one law, right, of everything has an end, right? Everything has a
Yeah.
beginning, everything certainly has an end, including our universe, as far as we know.
Yeah.
But legacy is another way to do that. This probably influences why, somewhere deep down in their psyche, or maybe not, in the case of our current president, as far as like, I'm going to be president of the United States, I will live forever, people will be reminded of me, yada yada
Hmm.
yada. Think about leaders throughout the history of the world. One of them was Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was heavily influenced by the story of Troy and Achilles, and he was fascinated by how Achilles achieved immortality, even though he died at the Battle of Troy by getting an arrow shot into his Achilles. He was a hero that lived on long after. So part of the thing that motivated Alexander the Great was, well, I'm just going to be the greatest conqueror and all. And what he what he did, unfortunately, is killed millions of thousands of people just so that his name could live on and on. Hence, me and you are talking about it, 3,000 years later after
Yeah.
his legacy. We know he existed. We know that person existed.
Right. Right.
Um,
It seems like to me, Keoni, as being your friend for a while, that legacy is kind of the way that, and in a positive manner, of course, not the Alexander the Great way,
mhm.
but it seems like legacy is the way you've kind of reconciled the end of this.
Yeah, I would say legacy is the way I would reconcile death. Absolutely. I feel like it's, a positive legacy, trying to do the best you can, maybe have a positive influence long after you're gone, is the only rational way to live this life that we have.
Yeah.
You know, um, and these days, right, you can create legacy all over the place, right? Think about social media. I can post up a funny cat video that will probably live longer than me. As long as social media is around, and people look, oh, look, Keoni, yeah, he died back in 2048, and it's now 2140, and look, his funny cat video is still up. That's another way to create legacy.
Good old rainbows meow.
that's right. Well, and then me and you, right now, where
Hmm.
I feel like me and you are creating legacy with with these podcasts we're putting out
Yeah.
every month.
Yeah.
And we're trying to, again, me and you're trying to make it sure that it's a positive legacy. It's about education. It's about, what we think, what we've been through in our short lives, and how we can influence others,
Yeah.
hopefully in a positive way.
Yeah. Hand up.
Yeah, right. But so I mean, I guess the whole reason is, why is it good to be reminded of death? And remember, we had Jade back on. We were talking about stoicism,
Hmm.
talked about that whole, I think it's a Latin saying, memento mori,
Hmm.
remember death, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a morbid thing to think about. If you could put it in perspective, though, it can also motivate you to try to get the positive legacy. And if
Right.
you're being rational about it, also, you're not going to live in fear of death, and take every magic pill that's advertised to you about, anti-aging pill, or spend thousands of dollars to get your, I don't know, stem cells taken out in the hopes that one day you're going to be, brought back to life, or whatever.
Right.
you know um so it can really influence, I think, remembering death in a positive way for people. So we know the strength of the evidence suggests that we are going to die no matter what we do. That's what the evidence suggests. Now, maybe technology may change that, but and maybe, according to people like Aubrey de Grey, these anti-aging scientists, or Ray Kurzweil, he wrote the book The Singularity is Near. We
Hmm.
talked about him before. Maybe they're right, but again, the preponderance of the evidence suggests that, just like Ponce de Leon and everybody that came before us, they're going to die, and so are we.
Do you think, Keoni, you would want to live forever if the
Well,
option was
that's it, and
available?
that's an excellent question. So let's think about that. So think about living forever.
Seems
Think,
tiresome.
well, not only does it seem tiresome, but think about living forever, but the people that you grew up with and loved and known do not. Then what's that world like?
Hmm.
Right? And
Hmm.
then think about living forever. And let's say that even if these other people around you can live forever, and but everything becomes boring to you now, right? After a while, doesn't everything just become, it's like eating chocolate cake every day
Mm-hmm.
for all
Mm-hmm.
eternity. I can't wrap my head around eternity. Do you even know how long that is? I mean,
Yeah, right.
eternity is eternity. Like, how long is that? You know, there's no end to it. So every day in, day out, day in, day out. I mean, to me, it's like, okay, you live forever. Now you basically may have created a hell that goes on forever and ever and ever,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So that's a great point you bring up. Do you really want to live forever? You know, I guess you know, if we had an immortality pill and we said, here, these pills are free, I guarantee almost everybody on this planet is going to take the immortality pill, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but again, it may be a curse.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see what that looks like 100 years later.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Like, how many people are like, yeah, this was a mistake. And
Yeah.
then you have to ask, okay, well, do you get to live young forever, or
Right.
do you just get old and demented and non-functional, but you're still living forever? I mean, we can basically put people on life support through science and help them live a very, very long time
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
vegetative state,
Right.
you know?
Alive, but not necessarily living.
Right,
Yeah.
alive, but not necessarily living. Exactly. So yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up. And I think, you know, the reason why we're talking about it today is I think it's a good reminder for people to think, okay, well, you know, what are the stories that I tell them myself about it? Is it influencing me in a positive way or a negative way? Um, and think about how you can, you know, basically live a better life surrounding that. Because think about what people do. I mean, you know, I mean, the cosmetic industry is based on this, you know, pretty much,
Mm-hmm.
you know. um I would say a lot of healthcare certainly is.
Yeah.
I'm certainly guilty of that in my practice. I think I've said before. I think a good way to help cure disease is to really think about aging as a disease,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you think about aging as a disease, then you're going to be, if you so-called cure aging, you certainly are going to, whatever that means, but you're certainly going to extend life or
Right.
quality of life.
Right.
You know, um, think about being reminded of immortality and how that may create evil in the world too, right? So, for example, well, here, I'll give you a story. I'll give you a religious story. So, basically, you're gonna die, but look, this religious narrative on, I don't know, let's say Islam or Christianity, or pick any religion. If you believe this way, right? If you believe this way, then you're saved.
Right.
You can live on forever. Or if you help this God allow more people to believe this way and get rid of the people who don't believe this way, you're going to live forever. You see how that is an influence? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it can influence the world in a negative way. Like, think about Alexander the Great. To get
Right.
to his immortality, he killed
He had to.
thousands and
Mm-hmm.
thousands of people.
Right.
Right? Think about Adolf Hitler, right? To hit, I think about his immortality narrative being, well, Nazi Germany is going to take over the world, and therefore it will live on forever.
Yeah. The more.
And in the process of doing that, killed thousands and millions of people.
Right. Right. And the more we talk about it, the more it seems that it's weird, but that this concern is super selfish.
Yeah. Well, I agree. It is very selfish. So that's why I want to talk about it, and that's why I
Yeah.
think both those books are fascinating, especially the main one we're talking about, which is Immortality: The Quest to Live Forever and How It Drives Civilization. But we talked about it's kind of a selfish thing in a sense. Anyway, it's like what you said. What does it really mean to live forever? And do we really want this? And I would say, when you really think about it rationally, we really don't want that. That's
Right.
what I would think, if you really think about what that really means.
Yeah.
And then I really like what the Stoics think about death. So memento mori, right? Remember death so that you can live more of a useful, positive legacy life. You remind yourself to help motivate you to not be idle and have a positive influence.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of my immortality narrative.
Yeah.
And if we look at it, I think we all have it. We all have it. But
Yeah,
then Epicurus, who's another Stoic, he said basically the fear of death is completely natural. So we know it's natural. Everybody has it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like you indicated, is it really rational? And I would say no. It's kind of irrational, right? And why would it be irrational? It's irrational. It's irrational because if we live forever, what does that actually mean? How will that influence your life in a positive or negative way, or influence the world in a positive, negative way? And we already know that we already know we're going to die. So that in itself makes it irrational.
Right. Right.
So the saying that he said is, why should I fear that can only exist when I do not? That which can only exist when I can,
I like that one.
Yeah. If I am, then death is not. If death is, then I am not. So basically,
who cares?
Yeah, like
you're not gonna.
Nobody's lived to talk about their death.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's lived to talk about their death, and as far as I know, nobody's come back from their death. Except we have a lot of mythology around that.
Right.
And that's again goes into this immortality narrative that we talk about. But we've never seen that. Did you ever see that gerbil again? I never saw my iguana again.
No. Poor Oreo.
Yeah, sorry to bring it up. Sorry to remind you.
But it's good. I need to remember death and understand that what I need to do about it, and remember to live.
Yeah, remember to live, right? And then there's another saying that Stephen K. brought up by a guy named Ludwig Wittgenstein. Death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death. So it's kind of saying the same thing Epicurus is saying, right? Death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death.
Yeah.
So basically we can stop telling ourselves lies around that, or stories around that, and live the best life that we can now. And we can be more rational about our behaviors when we think about death.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What else should we talk about?
So keeping it in the forefront of your mind. The problems I had that earlier just seem pretty stupid now. I must say.
Yeah.
I must say, knowing that it's just interesting to me how you have, because I do see that you've reconciled it to some degree with the legacy aspect, and that wasn't something I recently tapped into. But that's something I recently tapped into, I feel like, as I've gotten a little bit older in my 20s. Just that, and I feel like even before being 20 years old, it's almost like you don't even necessarily understand that this is a limited experience. Mm-hmm. And I'm just starting to catch on to that. And then that certain things will change. You're a teenager and you'll go to college and whatever, but you don't even necessarily see how this is going to continue to repeat itself, or you're going to continue to exist and then not exist. It's just, I feel like I'm just now becoming aware and like reconciling all this. And so it's a good conversation for me to have and be introduced to.
Yeah. And I'm at the age of the stereotypical midlife crisis thing, so maybe that's why I'm doing this podcast, because on the forefront of my mind. So, I'm seeing it in my mind, but also being reminded of the gray hair, the receding hairline, all the above. But no, you're looking good.
My forehead's getting bigger, Keoni. I'm growing real estate.
There you go. But he talked about an analogy of a book. It's like in a book, like, I don't know, any book, like the Tolkien books, Lord of the Rings, the characters in those stories, they don't care when you end the book. They're not worried about dying. It's like you open the book, they're just living their life. When you're reading the book, they're just living their life. There's not the story ends and another one can begin through another book. But it's just like enjoy your story. Enjoy your story, and just know that when you're dead, you're not going to care. You didn't care before you were born. You're not going to care when you're dead.
Yeah. So truly live the story.
Yeah.
Anything else, Keoni?
No, not unless you have something to add to that. Maybe once I finish both those books, we can do another podcast about it.
That sounds good. Sounds good.
So all right. Memento mori, without driving yourself crazy.
Beautiful. We'll talk to you guys next week.
All right. Take care, everybody.